Keep it down now. We are going to want to be waiting for that bastard Darwin horde to pass on by us. Then I say you and I get to run in. You aren't in any danger. Just still yourself.
James stopped clamoring around, letting his body go limp as he controlled his breathing. The hand over his mouth was massive, and the strength at which he was being held almost felt otherworldly. So fighting whomever this was just wasn't something he could physically do. The soft patter of footsteps could be heard in the hall, and what sounded like a heavy sack being dragged across the floor. He wondered if the vampire woman was dragging the body of the man down the hall with her, keeping him around as a snack, just in case she got hungry. The sound grew louder as she approached the room where he was currently being held captive. Panic began to sweep through him as visions of her finding him flooded his mind. He could see her capturing him, ripping his limbs off one by one and feasting on the blood that poured out of them. A flash of Alice strung upside down, her clothing removed, and the woman digging her fingers within her stomach, slowly penetrating her skin and tearing it away. The scream in his mind was present, as if he could feel the sound waves hit him. He watched in his mind as her intestines spilled to the floor and the undead woman buried her face within the now open chasm of her abdomen. Another vision. This time it was Rebecca crawling on the ground, fear and anguish on her face. Her leg broken with the bone sticking out of her skin just below her kneecap. He watched as the woman slowly walked up to her, gripping her by the hair and ripping her head back to expose her neck. She looked deep into James's eyes as she plunged her fangs into her skin, drinking deep. The choked cries of Rebecca hitting his soul and breaking him. James began to struggle against the man once again, and his grip grew tighter around him. He felt lips move up to his ears.
It isn't real. What she's showing you. It isn't real. Steel yourself now.
James stopped fighting him, clenching his eyes shut as tight as he could, doing his best to get the images out of his head, but they persisted, getting stronger with every step the woman took towards their location. Rebecca now splayed out on a table, her arms and legs removed and crudely stitched up, the necrotic flesh teeming with flies, her screams of agony bouncing off the walls as she moved her stubs around, trying to free herself from the nightmare. The woman emerging from the shadows, Alice's head in her hand, the fear cemented on her face as her life was taken from her. James heard the moment the vampire woman passed by the door, the sound of the body she drug feeling as if it were in the room where he hid. And as she walked down the hall, the visions of his friends dying began to fade, the feeling of panic subsiding within him. James reached up and pulled the man's hand off his mouth. He pushed away from him, trying to see his face. A beam of moonlight shone through a window, but the person who grabbed him was all shadows. He could make out that he was hunched down, almost as if to pounce if he needed to, but his body language was relaxed, almost telling James that he wasn't a threat, but he could become one real quick if he needed to. In a hushed tone, James spoke to the man.
There were 2 women that ran down this hall before me. Are they in here with you? Or did you see them?
Were those the women she kept putting into my head? Aye, I did see them run on by. Like Satan himself was close on their heels. I tried to call them in here, but I fear I may have spooked them more. They took off down the hall and are not sure where they went after that. It wasn't until I heard your scream and footsteps that I decided I would try and save you. I seen you down there, throwing that oil lamp at the she level. Thought it was the right good idea if I do say so myself. Then I saw it did nothing to her. The flames, that is. She stood in those and just let her skin bubble and burn. Gave me the willies.
So that's why you grabbed me? To save me?
Well, I had to do something. I couldn't just let her get you, like she did with that other fella. Besides, I think we were better in numbers in this little trial. It would give us a good fighting chance against whatever she is.
James nodded, hoping the man could see him in the darkness of the room. He stood, and James's breath caught in his throat. The man himself had to be nearly 7 feet tall.
Nah, I know it's a bit strange to see an Irishman standing so tall. Everyone has the same old stereotypes about us, brought up by those damned leprechauns. People be thinking we are short, and it's not the case. But I am something of an anomaly. Even within the States, just wait until you find out that I am of mixed race. It always gives me a laugh to see the look on people's faces when I start talking, and outright riot it is. But where are my manners? The name is Rory.
A large hand extended in James's direction, the man's paw nearly doubling that of his. He reached his hand out and firmly grasped Rory's, giving it a solid shake.
Nice to meet you, Rory. My name is James, and the two women I was with were Alice and Rebecca. I need to find them.
Well, we better be going then. Ain't no telling where they could be.
Should we go the direction they ran then?
I'd hate to, but it's probably our best option to find them. You just need to be vigilant. If we start feeling scared again, or start seeing those visions, we might want to hide or run the other way. I have a feeling that it's some tactic of hers. You know, the vampire lady.
James agreed, and the two men slowly opened the door to the hiding place. The smell of fresh death wafting up and stinging their nostrils. A loud click sounded, and James covered his eyes as a soft light illuminated the hallway, the yellow glow stinging his over-dilated pupils. As his vision regained, he could see small bloody footprints followed by a trail of blood, showing him exactly where the vampire had gone. He looked down the hall and saw that it too once again came to a junction point, the train of blood sliding to the left. A large hand fell on his shoulder, giving him a gentle nudge. James turned to see the light brown complexion of Rory, a big, toothy smile on his face. James stifled a laugh. The man was right. He could envision how people would react at seeing such a large man produce the accent he did.
You can picture it, can't ya? Growing up, people called me a freak. It wasn't until I was older that I realized that my heritage and background was a blessing in disguise. The world can be an outright cruel place if you let it be, and I decided not to let it turn me all sour. So I find the joy in how I make people laugh, just knowing that they are small-minded and weak.
Well, I'm glad I was able to meet you, Rory. If the circumstances of our meeting were different, I think we could be pretty damn good friends.
Indeed, but only one of us is going to make it out of here alive. So let's enjoy this little friendship as long as we can.
The two men stepped from the room and started following the trail of blood. Coming up to the junction at the end of the hall, James peered around the corner to the left, seeing that another corridor extended at least another football field in length in that direction, ending in another junction point. The trail of blood getting thinner and the footsteps fading. Looking to his right, he noticed the hallway was shorter and a carved stone staircase led up to another floor. He turned to Rory and shrugged his shoulders as if to say he had no idea which way to go. Rory pointed towards the stairs and then to the ground. There was something there. On the floor. James couldn't make out what it was, though. Moving closer to inspect the object, he realized that it was an uncracked glow stick, just like the ones he and Rebecca had during level 2. He thought they were all gone, but maybe she still had one with her? Or maybe Alice had a few and was leaving him breadcrumbs to their location. He smiled as he picked it up and gave Rory a soft nod of approval, the man reciprocating in kind. Gesturing his head towards the stairs, the two men began to ascend, being careful not to make any noise as they did so. The top of the stairs opened up into the most massive library James had ever seen. The books reaching up towards the glass-domed ceiling. Comfortable-looking velvet lounge chairs were placed in the middle of the room, creating a circular reading ring of sorts. The room had everything, except for an exit. If the women had run up these stairs and entered into this room, there would be no place to hide. So where exactly did they go?
I just can't seem to understand where the two lasses could have gone off to. Unless there was some hidden passage in here, I would question to say that they either disappeared into thin air or doubled back and went another direction.
Yeah, they could have. Wait, a hidden passage?
Aye, just like the video games. There is always some grand mansion that twists and turns, and eventually you run across a room that has no exits. That is, until you move a certain book or play the moonlit sonata on a piano. Oh, well looky here.
Rory pointed to the far corner of the room, and sure enough, there was a baby grand piano. James cocked his head in confusion, wondering if playing the piano was how the women escaped this room. It seemed more logical that they realized they were trapped in the room and doubled back. That is what Rebecca would do for sure.
So you're a fan of Resident Evil then too, huh?
Aye, who isn't? I always loved that part of the game. Playing the piano and the door opening up to a hidden room made my little heart feel full.
James mused at the thought. What if they had to play that piano and some hidden door opened for them to escape? Would they have even thought of that? Maybe Alice would have, but Rebecca would see this space for what it was. A death trap. He walked across the room and noticed that there was no sheet music anywhere. His hand slowly brushed over the keys. Did he chance pushing them down? The noise would for sure echo out of this room and down the hall, more than likely meeting the ear of the vampire woman, and if she lived in this mansion, she would find them. Rory strode up beside him, studying the piano and shaking his head.
I don't think it'd be wise to try it. They may have doubled back.
James agreed, and turned to the man, ready to state his next move when something caught his eye. On one of the chairs, glowing faintly within the now well-lit room, was a purple glow stick. He pushed by Rory, jogging up to the object, his mind racing. They had to have been here, and the glow stick was some sort of clue. He looked around the chair circle and noticed that there were 5 in total, all of them with popped glow sticks on them.
Rory, are you seeing this?
There was no answer. James looked up at the man to see him running full tilt in his direction. His arm full of books and a look of panicked fear on his face. The hair on the back of James's neck rose as he felt the gaze of eyes on him. Turning around to see the vampire woman, drenched in blood, staring daggers at him. The sound of scuttling could be heard, and he saw movement above the entryway she now stood in. Climbing down the wall like some vile insect was a man, making his way hurriedly down, ready to feast on James and the giant man. With a hiss, the man let go of the wall he clung to and fell 15 feet to the ground, landing delicately beside the undead woman. She gripped him by the back of the head and swung him around, pressing her open mouth on his and transferring the blood from her face and body onto him.
Why are these things never wearing any clothes? Here, James, place these books on the chairs. I think the lasses were leaving us a clue on how to get out of here.
Rory handed James an armful of books, and he placed them evenly on the chairs. A mechanical click sounded as Rory stepped on and depressed a large button on the floor. Weightlessness hit the men as the room around them rapidly fell from view. The last thing James saw were the chairs and the 2 vampires peering over the edge in anger. Then nothing but darkness as the sudden cold and wet feeling of water hit his skin. Coughing and pulling himself up onto dry land, James struggled to breathe. The water had caused him to gasp just as his head went under, his lungs filling with the cold and acrid tasting fluid. Rory ran up to him, patting him on the back hard with his meat club of a hand.
That's it, boyo. That's it. Let it all out.
Oh God, what is that fucking smell?
James covered his nose with his hand as the pungent scent of rot filled his nostrils.
Well, given the looks of this place, I would say you're getting a mixture of rotted bodies and a boatload of garlic.
James's eyes went wide as he noticed the hundreds of bodies lining the room around him, all in varying states of decay. Bones were beginning to become exposed as the skin around them liquefied and rotted away, sloughing off of bodies to hit and congeal on the stone floor below them. Maggots squirmed in and out of wounds and exposed sores as they worked their damnedest to eat away at the tons of flesh before them. James's stomach lurched, and it took everything in him not to vomit as another waft of decay hit his nostrils. He turned towards Rory.
Where are you getting the garlic smell? I only smell these dead people.
Look back into the water. It seems that the Game Master made this area off limits to those beasts up there by adding some fresh cut garlic in the waters below. I guess we can think of it as a save point.
A shitty fucking save point.
Aye.
Rory pointed down the corridor that lay before them.
Now I'm thinking the lasses might have hightailed it down that way. If you done caught your breath, we should get moving.
The man extended his hand down to James, and with one good pull, had him up to his feet. The strength of this man was astounding. It was as if he exerted no effort at all to lift him off the ground, and that made him dangerous. While they were allies now, in the end, only 3 of them could make it out of here, and James wasn't going to sacrifice Rebecca or Alice to let Rory continue on. He didn't want to kill the man, though. He liked him, and he seemed like a good person, wanting to do what's right. But he couldn't trust him to sacrifice himself to let Rebecca or Alice live, and in the end, James knew that he would have to kill him.
Right, let's get moving. I hope they haven't gotten too far ahead of us.
The 2 walked down the corridor, their feet slipping and slopping in the viscous human waste around them. James looked to the ground and noticed there were shoe prints within the slime that resided on the floor. 2 sets of shoe prints. His heart raced at that thought. Alice and Rebecca had made it here for sure, and they were somewhere close by. He sped up his pace, Rory following along with ease. The bodies were plentiful within and lining the walls. He wondered if these were past contestants or maybe the failed experiments of previous vampires the rich had made. He looked at their teeth as he walked by, not noticing any sort of fangs or mutations. A woman's scream echoed down the hall. It was close, and without a word being uttered, James took off as fast as he could, his heart accelerating as the adrenaline released, dilating his veins and pushing his heart into overdrive. He could hear the heavy footfalls of Rory behind him. Another scream, even closer now. The tunnel beginning to curve and incline at a steady pace. They were moving up, but up to where, he did not know. He couldn't think about it right now. All he could think about were the women and ensuring that they would be safe. Light was now beginning to pour through the tunnel, illuminating it more as they rose to the surface. He saw Alice first, lying on the ground, her face bloody and bruised, as if she was just hit. She was struggling to get to her feet, but every time she tried to rise up, she would fall over into the walls. James could tell that her world was rocked.
Rory, help her. I need to help Rebecca.
Rory sped up past James and got to Alice, gently lifting her to her feet and holding her steady.
Mr. James, he is...
Her words trailed off as James exited the tunnel system and out into an unkempt garden. Vines crept along old trellises, bushes were overgrown and patchy, and decaying vegetation and flowers riddled the ground. The sound of struggling came from his left, and James looked over to see Rebecca fighting with a man, holding him off as best she could as he pushed himself on top of her, his hands around her throat, trying to squeeze the life out of her. She dug her teeth into his forearm, biting down hard, and pulled her head away with a large chunk of his flesh in her mouth. She spit it in his face, and the man rolled backwards, gripping at his wound, trying to stop the bleeding. Rebecca rose to her feet and pounced on him, throwing wild punches and using her fingernails as claws, torturing the man's face. James took off towards them in a sprint, reaching Rebecca as she began to dig her thumbs into the man's eye sockets. He howled in pain as she let out the most primal growls he had ever heard. It made James hesitate. What if she had been bitten by one of the vampires and now she had turned into one? Would she try and attack him next? With her thumbs still firmly placed within the man's eye sockets, she gripped and lifted him up, slamming his head on the hard ground below. She repeated this process over and over again until his cries of pain subsided, lifting his head one last time. James noticing the now open and exposed cranial cavity as it split and leaked blood and brain fluid all around. With one final exertion of effort, Rebecca slammed the man's head down again, leaning over, getting inches from his face, and screaming at him like a wild animal. James ran up to her, pulling her off him. She kicked and fought with him, doing everything she could to get her hands back on the man and ruin his now dead body.
Hey, calm down. Calm down. He's dead. He is dead. He can't hurt you anymore.
He felt her begin to go limp in his arms. Her body hitched as tears and sobs came from her. She rose and hugged him.
That piece of shit attacked us. We were coming out of the tunnel and he blindsided Alice, punching her in the face hard, and grabbed me and threw me to the ground.
She pulled away from James quickly and turned as if to help Alice, stopping in place when she saw her and Rory emerge from the tunnels, her body going rigid and her face turning hard as stone.
It's okay. He's a friend. He saved me in the hallway.
He isn't a friend, James. Only 3 of us can make it out of here. As far as I'm concerned, this man is a threat.
James softly grabbed her arm, pulling her into him. He kissed her deeply, holding her as if he would never let her go. He felt her body melt, and she wrapped her arms around him, pulling his head into her and moving her tongue around in his mouth. He pulled back, staring into her glassy, beautiful eyes.
Only 3 of us. And I won't kill someone who isn't trying to do harm to us first.
He released her and walked by her to meet Rory and Alice, to check on them and to let them know that he was going to kill himself so they could go on and finish level 4. The speakers crackled to life.
Well, well, well. 1 down and 1 more to go. Rebecca, I'm gonna have to say I fucking love your style. It's so primal and raw. You wouldn't believe how many people actually bet against you dying when Mark had you pinned to the ground. Oh yeah, his name was Mark. He had a wife and 3 kids back home. One of them with cancer. The money would have really helped him a ton. But I guess that's besides the point. Now, what a lovely little group you all have made. It almost makes me want to let all 4 of you go on to the next level, just so we can watch your little team fall apart one by one. But unfortunately, rules are rules. So I guess the drama has to play out here. Have fun, you 4.
Have I said how much I hate that man?
So many times. How you doing, kid?
I'm hardly a kid, Mr. James. I know I may seem it, but I am a full-grown woman.
Sorry, it's just a term of endearment. How are you?
Much better knowing that this hunk of a man saved my ass.
It's all in a day's work, Mom. The name's Rory. Pleased to meet you.
Oh my, and an Irish accent? I do think I'm in heaven.
Rory blushed and cleared his throat. He went to speak, but his words were cut short as a hand burst through his chest, his eyes wide with shock and a single trail of blood running out of his nose and into his open mouth. Alice screamed as she fell to the floor and scampered away from him. Another hand burst through his abdomen, gripping at his flesh. Slowly and methodically, Rory was pulled apart, the tearing of his skin popping audibly, blood running out of him and falling to the floor like a heavy downpour. He tried swatting at the hands as if his efforts could shoo them away like a bothersome fly. He started gasping for breaths, and James watched as his now exposed lungs spasmed wildly. One of the hands retreated, grabbing his spine and snapping it backwards. The man folded like a wet towel, the life now absent from his eyes. And standing behind him was the vampire woman, sucking on the end of spine that she just tore from the man as one would a chicken bone. The man that was with her pounced on Rory, biting into his neck and drinking deeply. James pulled Alice to her feet, and they retreated towards Rebecca, all 3 of them now cowering in fear, watching as these monsters ate and drained everything they could from Rory's body. The loudspeaker came to life, the game master laughing as he spoke.
Well, that was a brutal ending to a magnificent level. Those little vampires we constructed performed just how we intended. They gave us a show, they projected their fear, and they made a lot of people very rich. And that includes one of you 3 down there.
Fuck you. We're tired of this stupid game.
There isn't much you can do about it, James. You are in it until the end, and there are a ton of bets on you. Everyone can see past that pathetic hero complex you have. Your self-sacrificing need to end yourself for people you hardly even know. We have your file. We know who you really are. And remember, you were selected for this. We have been watching you for longer than you even know. We know that at the first sign of real trouble, you will crumble and do whatever you can to save your own life. That goes for you all. Alice, and your chipper attitude, and the positivity you just seem to exude off of you is all a farce. We know what you do when you're all by yourself. We've seen how quickly that perkiness can turn into pure rage and violence. The girl has demons, and a large sum of money at the end of this is only going to make those demons grow larger. And well, there isn't much to say about Rebecca. I think she has shown her true colors to everyone. Jesus, even on night 1, she murdered that poor man as they hid upstairs.
James went to speak, to stand up for Rebecca and state that the man intended on forcing himself on her. But the game master carried on.
Shut it, James. She only told you what she wanted to tell you. What she wanted you to hear. It's all a ploy. To get you to fall in love with her and to protect her all the way to the end. And when the time is right, she will betray you. She's done it before. Hell, she makes a living off of it. It was no random occurrence that night she met you in the bar. You were her next victim.
James turned to Rebecca, that same stoic look on her face, and she wouldn't meet his eyes. There was a pain in his chest as the realization of it all hit him. His chest feeling heavy and his heart beginning to beat irregularly.
There it is. There is that betrayal and drama we all love to see. I think I will leave that feeling here, fresh in your minds.
The 2 vampires rose to their feet and began to slowly saunter to the 3 remaining contestants. The woman coming up to James and brushing her hand across his cheek. He tried to move, to get away from the foul stench of death that poured from her mouth, but his body wouldn't respond. She reached down, grabbing his hand, and slowly ran it up her body, making it rest on her right breast, and she leaned in, licking the side of his face, breathing heavy into his ear. She laughed, watching him as he closed his eyes. She took his other hand and placed it on her exposed buttocks and pulled herself in close to him. She was mere centimeters from his face, now staring into his shut eyes, willing him to open them. Again she laughed as she started grinding herself on his leg, gripping the back of his head. The smell of rot and decay hitting him in waves with every heavy breath she took. James began to whimper. He couldn't do anything. They were somehow controlling him. He heard the soft cry of Alice and he opened his eyes. The vampire woman now leaning her head back in the throes of ecstasy. In his peripheral vision, he saw the male vampire gripping Alice from behind, his hands moving all around her body, invading her space. She cried out in pain as the man's fingernail cut her across the cheek. And the anger boiled inside of him. Why are they allowing for this to happen? Why not end the level and just get on with it? The man pushed Alice over, and she fell to the ground, unable to move or even fight. The male vampire looking at her seductively as he walked over to her. He reached for her pants, gripping them hard, ready to expose her and do what he wanted when the loudspeakers crackled back to life.
I guess we can stop here. One of the donors decided they did not want this to play out and ended up outbidding the others. The price was high. And that's good news for you. Well, one of you. Get some sleep. Level 4 begins shortly.
Both the vampires stopped their deviant acts of sexual pleasure, walking back into the tunnel as if nothing had happened at all. James regained control of his body and he ran to Alice, but Rebecca beat him there first. He knelt down to the sobbing woman and helped her stand to her feet. She pushed James away and hugged Rebecca tightly, her body racking up and down with each sob. Rebecca held her tight, whispering to her that everything was okay, that the monsters were gone now and they couldn't hurt her anymore. She peered up at James, the once hardened look no longer on her face. He saw behind her eyes the fear and sadness that only a shared experience can provide. He decided right then that the game master was lying about her, about them all, and he would do whatever he could to help protect these women so one of them can make it out of the next round. The sound of an alarm blared, and in unison, the 3 of them lowered themselves to the ground in a sitting position, waiting for the electrical shock to hit their bodies and cause them to go inert. Rebecca reached out her hand to James, and he firmly grasped it in his. The electricity hit him hard, causing him to convulse and fall flat to the ground. and the world around him faded into darkness.